Today we are going to be interviewing someone who has completely overcome agoraphobia. Agoraphobia, an anxiety disorder which someone suffers from panic attacks to the point that they avoid many situations and often become housebound. I don't know if I've mentioned this and I don't like identifying with it, but I do suffer from agoraphobia. I was never fully housebound, but the person I'm interviewing today was. Welcome to Overcoming Within. Today we're here with a very special guest, someone who I found in one of my darkest days, a fellow Aussie, a soon-to-be published author of the book Here You Are Courageous, former owner of the blog Anxiety Mama, now known as IamLaurenRose.com. I present to you with my warmest welcome to you, Lauren Rose. Welcome.
Hello, thank you. What an intro.
I spent a lot of time working on it this morning to make it sure it was absolutely perfect.
I just need you to come with me to parties and just slide that in.
100%. So I found you in 2021, through one of your ever popular videos, Life After Agoraphobia. Now, someone as yourself, who obviously knows what agoraphobia is and you have an understanding, what was your understanding of agoraphobia prior to any of this happening?
I didn't really have an understanding of it, to tell you the truth. I didn't really know what it was. I didn't even really know what anxiety was, to be honest. Like I knew of it, but I couldn't have put into words what it would be like to experience it. I would have just thought it was being a bit nervous, maybe. Yeah, and when I got diagnosed with agoraphobia, I remember I had to go home and Google what it was because I had no idea. And when I read it, I was sitting on Google reading all the symptoms and going, this is exactly what I have. Like, where has this come from? So, yeah, I didn't have any idea what it was. And it was a big learning curve for me when I got lumped with that diagnosis and had to kind of research it by myself.
Do you feel like there's any misconceptions?
Yes and no. I know that when it's represented in movies, they tend to, like, the agoraphobics are totally fine at home, but as soon as they walk out of their house, it's like the whole world spins. Which I feel like is kind of accurate in a way, but then also completely not, because there were so many times where I would be at home and, my mental world would be spinning anyway. It wasn't like I would go outside and my vision would suddenly blur. There'd be a whole build up to having to leave the house where it was like I couldn't sleep, I couldn't eat, I couldn't think properly. It wasn't just like as soon as I opened the front door, shit just went crazy. So I think that's one of the like Hollywood stereotypes about agoraphobia. And I guess in a larger sense, a lot of people just think that it's you are completely housebound, which is not always the case, as you know. Like, agoraphobia comes in sort of many kind of levels, and you can have a comfort zone, which is, a whole city. You can be comfortable traveling around that whole city, but then be uncomfortable traveling out of that city. So, yeah, I think there's lots of nuance to it that isn't represented broadly.
Yeah, I kind of agree with you on that. I think when I remember just a random conversation I had with someone back when I was in high school about agoraphobia, and someone was like, "Oh, that's when you're stuck in your house." And I didn't realize until obviously I started dealing with it that it's a lot more than it doesn't have to just be that, as you just said. It could be fear of open spaces, fear of public speaking, it's the fear of fear, from my understanding. Dealing with it. So tell me your experience with everything. When did this begin?
So let me take you back. It's hard to like pinpoint. Like, there was kind of like a beginning moment, and then there also wasn't. But so I would go back to my first panic attack. And that was one day at work. I was having a completely normal day, completely comfortable, there was nothing weird happening. And then I was just standing at work, and out of nowhere, I just suddenly had this weird sensation wash over me, like I was going to be sick, or I was going to faint, or just something weird. And I thought I was sick. And I went to the bathroom, and I just remember looking at my face in the bathroom mirror and seeing my whole face drain of color, which was such a startling thing to see because I'd read about it, but I'd never seen it happen. And I just assumed that I was sick, like I had a virus or a bug or something. So went home, felt fine. The next day came back to work, and the same thing happened again in almost exactly the same way. And it was such a confronting thing because it was like as soon as I got home from being at work, I felt okay again. But then the next day, I would feel sick again, and I couldn't figure out what was going on. And then it kind of continued in that way for like about a year, probably 12 to 18 months, where every time I was at work or every time I was in the car, it was like my body would kind of shut down. And I was having panic attacks, but I didn't realize that at the time because I didn't know what they were. I just knew that something weird was happening to my body. I kept going to doctors and kept saying all the physical things that were happening, like, I'm having a lot of digestive issues. I'm getting a lot of stomach cramps. I'm like, just feeling weird physically. And so they kept running tests. I had like colonoscopies and blood tests and all sorts of like invasive procedures that just kept coming back saying I was totally healthy. But I felt the worst I'd ever felt. And so it didn't make any sense. And I guess over the space of those like 12 to 18 months, I kind of started to twig that it was more of a mental thing, mostly because, physically I was fine. And I kind of started to realize it might be anxiety. And I became really keen to sort of get rid of it. And I was like I would write in my journal, like, I don't know if I can swear on here, but
Go for it.
yeah, I would say like, fuck you, anxiety. You're not going to beat me and all this stuff. And then I would just fall apart. Like the next day would come and I would just be a wreck again. And it just kept happening. And it got so bad that I started to avoid doing everything that caused me to panic, which was everything. So it did get to the stage where I couldn't leave the house. And then I was stuck at home for about 2 years, just trying to figure out how to get better, basically. So yeah, that's that's the story of the beginning of the end, but also the beginning of the beginning.
I totally understand the idea of just because I did the same thing of giving up, or at the time giving up on everything. I luckily was living at home at the time. I quit my job. I was down to my last cent to my name. Yeah. Were you dating someone at the time?
Yeah, I was in a long-term relationship. And we had traveled together. We had done all sorts of things together. And to go from being someone in the relationship who was, keen for traveling, keen for partying, keen for whatever, to suddenly not being able to leave the house, it completely changed the dynamic of our relationship. And it was really hard for both of us, and that relationship didn't survive, unfortunately. But that wasn't necessarily due to anxiety and panic. There were cracks to begin with before that. But yeah, it's an impossible thing to ask your partner to, I guess, stay with you when you don't really exist outside of the four walls of your house,
Yeah. And what about friends? Did you lose any friends during this time?
I actually didn't really lose any friends. I was lucky enough that all my friends would come and visit me. My house was kind of the hangout anyway. So everyone was used to coming to my place, so that didn't really change anything. Everyone was really patient with me, and I guess a lot of them didn't understand. But yeah, they all really stuck by me, and yeah, I was lucky not to lose any friends over it.
Okay, well that's pretty good. I lost one friend. I was very upset over it.
Yeah,
but alas, that's a whole different story. I'm not going to get into that. As a more deeper question that I have for you, and this is going to sound a little weird. So, starting off, when I before I quit smoking, I could not imagine my life without cigarettes at all until I actually quit smoking. Would you say that would be the same with agoraphobia in your experience?
Yes and yes, because I was also a heavy smoker. So I can totally relate. But yeah, I remember when I was agoraphobic, I couldn't understand how I would ever be able to live life again without having those feelings. You know, I would like see my friends going about their day, going to work, like going traveling and stuff. And it was so bizarre to me. I was like, I'm never going to be able to do that again because I will never not feel this way. You know, it seemed like a totally different universe that other people were living in.
Another misconception, just going back really quickly, is people thinking that it's agoraphobics are afraid of just going outside. When I believe in my, from my understanding and my own experience, as obviously I do deal with it, is it's one specific symptom that is creating that fear. Would you agree? And does that make sense?
Yeah. Yes. I've been pretty vocal about, for me, it was the concept of needing the bathroom. Because a feature of my personal brand of panic was that I would get digestive issues and I would suddenly feel like I was just going to have explosive diarrhea. And so that's why leaving the house for me was so terrifying, because it was like I'm away from being able to control that possibility. You know, if that happens at home, that's not a massive deal. But if it happens when I'm out in public, it's all over for me. And so, like, that was the big thing for me. So, you know, going back to what I said about the whole Hollywood thing and like leaving the house and the world spinning, for me, it was that I would leave the house and my gut would start churning, or it would already be churning before I left the house. And so that was what I was having such a hard time controlling. And I think for a lot of agoraphobics, it's, you know, the ones I've spoken to over the years, it's like the fear of their blood sugar dropping, or the fear of fainting, or yeah, like the fear of having a bowel or bladder accident, the fear of going crazy. It's those things that they're so afraid of. And it's when I'm out of the house, I can't control that as well as I can if I'm in the house. I think that's what it definitely was for me, and sounds like kind of what it was for you as well.
Yeah, definitely. Still kind of trying to work my way through it. I mentioned on your show years ago, I never really knew the top of depersonalization and derealization, and that's what scared me so much. It got to a point where I found the top, and then I started recovering from it, going through a whole nother thing now, finding another top that I haven't really reached. Is yeah, is the point that I need to work through. I did hear that your first steps into recovery was, funnily enough, the same kind of situation, going for little walks and getting a little bit further each time. What was your, if if you can recall, your breakthrough moment where you were like, wow, holy shit, I can actually do this?
I think for me, there were multiple breakthrough moments. Because the thing is, it never felt like I thought it was going to feel like, you know, I thought that I would like be cured one day, or that I would, you know, I would just suddenly do something that had otherwise been impossible for me, but suddenly it was easy. And it was never really like that. It was always kind of like pulling teeth to a degree. Um, but I think like over time, when I would do things that had seemed so difficult and had kept me up at night worrying about it, like the first time I went to a restaurant for dinner with my family, like literally a 3-minute drive from my house. But, you know, I'd stayed awake thinking about that, like, how is this going to go? How am I going to do it? And then to come away from that feeling on top of the world and like, oh my God, that was so easy. What was I worried about? It was those kind of moments repeated where I was like, I can actually do things that I I am convinced I can't do, and I can do them easily. Even if the lead up is so painful and so hard, the actual event is not as bad as I make it out to be. So yeah, it was multiple breakthroughs that kind of led to me being able to move through.
Yeah, interesting. And it's for those victories that I've had, it's such a rewarding feeling of just, like I think we can live and have lived so much in our heads. And when you're able to do something like that, it's huge.
Mm.
During that time, did you ever have dreams about like panic, like you're in a certain situation, or like that's a big thing for me. All the time.
No, I've always been a vivid dreamer, and I always remember my dreams. And yeah, I still have dreams where I can't get to the toilet and I panic. It's very frequent for me. But one thing I didn't have is that I know a lot of people deal with waking up with panic attacks, and I never really I wouldn't wake up in the night panicking. I guess because I'm a deep sleeper, but I would always have really intense dreams where it was like I was in a situation that I couldn't escape. And I would then wake up in the morning feeling like, what if the fact that I dreamt that means that it's going to happen?
I kind of feel like sometimes my dreams might be trying to help me in dealing with these things. Would you agree with the same thing?
Yeah, possibly. I think that I can't remember who said it, but there's some kind of philosopher that said that the reason we panic a lot in our dreams is because it's when our like fight or flight mind is relaxed enough to let that fear through so it can play out. I don't know if that's true, but yeah, I guess it kind of gives us time to practice the worst case scenario.
I only ask because like it's so much like real life. Like I would be in the car with someone else and we'd be driving an hour away and I would be like in my head, I'd be like, oh my God, like fuck, like we're so far away. And then I would say, just relax. Like it's okay. And
Yeah.
that goes up and then it comes back down. so,
That's amazing
so
that you dreamed the whole way through it. I only get to like the
it's
fuck part and it's all over.
I think so many things during the day can have factors in dreams that it's not worth over analyzing. But if you're having recurrent dreams about the same thing, maybe it's worth it.
Mm.
Now,
So it's an interesting world.
the big question I had for you is you actually, I'm going to be honest with you, I do know the answer to this, but for the audience, have you traveled overseas since?
I have. Yes, I
Nice.
have done 2 trips. Technically 3 because I went to Tassie and that kind of is over water, but it's still technically part of Australia. But yeah, no, I have been on 2 overseas trips, and one of them was when I was still very much like some days I wasn't leaving the house for whatever reason. I was still quite limited when I did that trip. So I went from doing a 30-40 minute flight to Sydney was the furthest I'd gone after having agoraphobia. And then I did an 8-hour flight to Hong Kong, which was
Wow.
awesome. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. How was that? Like you mentioned that, and I agree with you that it never, you don't just feel normal. You just learn how to deal with the situations. You learn that anxiety and panic attacks don't hold. They don't have so much power over you than you believe after you've gone through it. But getting on that plane for the first time, how was that experience?
Again, it was one of those things where it was like the event paled in comparison to the worry I'd put into it. The morning of the flight, I was excited. And then when we got on the plane, I was still excited, but like a little bit like, ooh, like bordering on crazy. But the flight was fine. Like I was like, wow, I am handling this like a boss. But it was the next day when I woke up in the hotel and had that, that dip of like morning anxiety and that peak of morning cortisol where she just hit the fan, and I was like, what have I done? Like, I've made a terrible mistake. But I kept going, and I managed to work through that. But yeah, the flight was nowhere near as scary as I thought it was going to be. And I think it just speaks to panic in general, is that we build it up in our head for days and weeks and months in advance. So much so that when we actually get to it, it's just nowhere near as bad.
Yeah. I think probably, like, in terms of an exposure session, I found it most easy to just don't plan it, just do it. I think the more I think about it, the more that I start worrying, and the more if I speak to a friend about it, then I just start worrying. So I agree that it's just best to just, I don't know, just do it. Like, yeah, I don't know where I'm going with this. I lost my point. Anyway, going on. Moving on. The idea, so a good example of the differences between us at the moment is, as you were explaining that, like, me waking up in a different country at the moment, like, I used to travel a lot too, freaks me out, like waking up that morning and being like, holy shit, I don't know, that's still what I've got to get through myself. In terms of setbacks, how did you handle setbacks, and what type of strategies did you apply to prevent what may have been a full-blown relapse in your mind or real life?
Yeah. I have a video on this where I talk about it at length, but when I had the setback that I spoke about in the video, it was only minor. I had a very large panic attack one day, and I was scared to leave the house for the next 2 days. And I was like, oh God, it's happening again. That was nothing compared to when COVID hit, and then we actually couldn't leave the house, and I thought it was a great time to go off my antidepressants. And then I had a real setback. And I had months of really questionable and challenging mental health. And I was having panic attacks a lot and really struggling. And so that was a significant setback. But I've always managed to look at setbacks as like another layer in the onion. Like how you were saying before, another top that you haven't explored. Like, I just think that every time I have a setback, it's because I'm like unlocking like a new boss level of my anxiety. And like I'm gonna meet a new part of myself that is necessary for the journey ahead. But in saying that, when I'm having a setback, it's hard to be objective about that. And it's hard to think like, oh, this is for the greater good, like this is going to be helpful one day. At the time when it's happening, I'm just miserable. And I write, I go back to the basics. I do yoga, I write, I just do the very basic things: eat, sleep, complain. And I reach out, I guess. I make sure, I have my support network, like my parents, my partner, my dogs, my kids. And yeah, I just kind of like cocoon myself until the storm has passed, which it always does. And then you always find that you've come out of it learning something new. So I never think of it as a setback. I always think of it as like a new path forward.
Wholeheartedly agree, especially to that last point. I believe that the storm always ends. Even though in your mind it might not seem like it. The nights I had with, like, everything feeling unreal, I thought like, oh my God, I'm gonna be stuck like this forever. But it always passes. Yeah, I totally agree with you on that. You mentioned your parents. How did your parents react to the situation?
I'm quite close with my parents and they're very supportive, but my dad is of that generation where you don't talk about mental health. And I remember I made them come with me to a therapy session once because my therapist thought it would be useful. And my dad just sat there and said, like, I don't think there's anything wrong with Lauren. Lauren's great. And I was like, what are you talking about? I'm a wreck. But yeah, so I guess my mum tries really hard to understand, and my dad maybe understands in his own way, but doesn't talk about it very much. But I'm really lucky in that they are both incredibly supportive, incredibly helpful. You know, they would do my shopping. They would like go and get things for me that I needed. And, you know, they were always there to cheer me on when I was like, I think I'm going to go into the city, or I think I'm going to go do this. And then I'd call them from the city and be like, I'm doing it. I'm fucking doing it. And they'd be like, yes. So yeah, they've been amazing. So yeah, I'm very lucky.
Yeah, that's great to hear. And I just can't fathom as well. It's almost 2 years in the house. What did you do like all of that time? Was that your time of self-discovery or yeah.
I did a lot of nothing. No, so it was basically, it followed like a curve. Like I was at home at the beginning and I'm like, I'm going to beat this. Like I'm going to read all the books. I'm going to drink all the green smoothies. I'm going to, you know, figure out the key. And then I got worse and worse and worse and worse. And then I fell pregnant. And so that was a whole other thing, navigating having a pregnancy while being housebound, because obviously I couldn't make it to medical appointments. And then my mental health got very bad. But also I started a blog, Anxiety Mama that you mentioned. I started recording videos because I felt so cut off that it was like my way to have an outlet. I would, you know, put things on my blog like recipes and like stupid things that I thought might be relevant. I kept myself busy to distract myself from the pain that I was in. But it ended up being the most amazing thing, because through the blog I found other agoraphobics. Through videos I found other people that had my specific kind of toilet anxiety, agoraphobia. And yeah, that was when like recovery started to happen. So yeah, but yeah, 2 years inside was a long ass time.
I'm assuming it would have gone really fast at the same time, because you were probably doing the same thing majority of the day. You know, getting up, working on a blog, yada yada. Yeah.
It went so slow. I can't tell you. It felt like 10 years.
Oh, really? Wow.
Yeah.
Do you find like I wouldn't say the word regret, but looking back, would you have done it any differently than you did at the time? Like if you knew that it wouldn't have taken as long as it did potentially, how would you have gone about it differently?
I don't think so now. Like sitting at the vantage point that I'm at now, I can kind of see how everything happened the way that it did happen in order to get me here. But there was ages where I really did go hard on myself for how long it took me, and how much time I wasted trying to get rid of agoraphobia and trying to get rid of anxiety. And I felt quite stupid for having thought that I could, you know, eradicate fear from my brain completely. Yeah, and I don't know, but no, I don't regret the way I did it, because it was all necessary in order to get me here, and in order to kind of like the relationships that broke down needed to break down so that I could find my way to the ones I'm in now. So yeah, it all worked out in the end.
Yeah, I think reaching that bottoming out is kind of necessary.
Yes.
In anything in life. Like I think with me, with when I realized with the smoking, how much I was smoking, how I would eat, like I needed to reach that bottom to I guess you could say everything happens for a reason. I don't want to get too spiritual, but I do believe it. I think, yeah. So, and just setting off because I didn't realize we have 6 minutes left of our 40-minute Zoom call. Again, a question that you like to end off with: if someone was going through the same thing right now, at the very beginning, how would you suggest they approach the situation?
Okay, so there's two pieces of advice I'd have. And the first one would be to stop fighting and stop pushing. I think there's a whole mindset that we need to conquer anxiety and that we need to not let anxiety win. And I think what you're asking for is more tension and more fear and more of a separation between your head and your heart. And that just makes things even harder in the end. So I'd say stop fighting and start trying to build a relationship with yourself instead. Start trying to build a relationship with your anxiety. And the second thing would be to reach out in whatever way feels accessible for you. And like for me, that was doing it via the internet through like an anonymous blog. I didn't think anyone in my real life knew about it. But they did, fuckers. But yeah, so that was the way I felt safest in talking about the things that scared me the most. And it was what helped me the most. So if there's a space where you can actually be open about what you're going through, do it. Because you will find your people through that, and you will find that you actually aren't as alone as you think you are, and that you are, actually like side by side with some amazing people. And you meet the most incredible folks on this journey, like how I've met you. So don't be afraid of it, because it's going to be something that changes your life for the better, just in a really trippy fucking way.
That was great. I love that. And thank you for coming on. If anyone is interested in Lauren's story, I am laurenrose.com.
Thank you so much, Jake.